The foundation has been in existence for over 20 years. During that time, its main activity has been the ownership and operation of 2 houses with 15 bedrooms for the accommodation of clients suffering from mental illness. The residents, with the support of the professionals at Mid-Atlantic Wellness Institute, are able to live in the general community rather than be institutionalized. At present, our residents are able to cover part of the cost of their accommodation by way of funding from the Department of Financial Assistance. We at the Foundation hope that in the coming year we will be able to open a 3rd home for this purpose, as there is a very high demand for such facilities. In addition, in the past year, the Foundation has worked to become more active in other areas involving mental health. We are keen in particular to work on advocacy for mental health issues, and tonight's event is one of such initiatives, as is our program currently being undertaken for outreach into the island's schools. I would like to thank our sponsors who have assisted us to put on this event, in particular Cell One Bermuda, Tropicana, Aquafina, and Quaker Oats. Their support has been vital both for tonight's event and also for our outreach program in the schools. I'll now introduce the moderator and panel members for this evening. The moderator is Dr. John Can, former Chief Medical Officer. The panel members, and perhaps you could just raise your hand or stand up when I mention your name. Tanae Ferbert, Chair of the National Accessibility Advisory Council. Magistrate Juan Wolf. Mike Hansen, Chair of the Human Rights Commission. Susan Thomas, who will share with us an individual perspective on living and working in Bermuda with a mental health condition. Dr. Peter Yates, Consultant Child and Adolescent Psychiatrist at Mid-Atlantic Wellness Institute. Winston Rogers, Clinical Manager at Mid-Atlantic Wellness Institute. Major Frank Pittman of the Salvation Army. Beverly Daniels of the Salvation Army. And Diana Taylor of the Department of Financial Assistance. Unfortunately, Tawana Wedderburn of the Bermuda Health Council, who is meant to be on the panel, has had to withdraw from the panel because of a family emergency. Also present this evening from the Mid-Atlantic Wellness Institute are Dr. Sharita Rayner, clinical psychologist, I believe is at the front. Carla Luby, mental welfare officer. Carla, you're here somewhere, yeah, thanks. And Jacinth Olboy Onaya. Jacinth Onaya, so. Thank you to all of you for being with us tonight to share your views on this important topic. I'll now turn the chair over to, or the floor over to Dr. Kant. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Let me add my welcome to all of you. It's a pleasure to attempt to moderate tonight's discussion. As I understand it, the real attempt of this discussion is, objective of this discussion, is to help demystify mental illness, to help us understand the importance of mental health in the scheme of overall health, and to help our community learn to deal most appropriately and effectively with those who suffer from mental ill health. So we'll start with the discussion of various topics. We've tried to divide it up into areas: mental health, what exactly is the status of mental health in Bermuda, the management of mental health conditions, discussion of the resources that are available to us, and then get into what are the issues, the challenges, and what recommendations would our panelists have for improving our situation here in Bermuda. And that will be the discussion.
I think a good starting point when talking about mental illness is talking about mental health. So there's an issue of being healthy and an issue of being ill. And the model that I use is that there's health, and then something happens or changes, and then you become ill, and ideally you return back to health after treatment, or if the illness is short-lived. So I think that's the first point I'd like to make, because there are lots of other things that don't have such clear-cut beginnings and points of change as an illness. So, for example, personality disorders which are much slower in evolution through childhood, adolescence into adult life, developmental disorders that are there from conception, intelligence. So I'm going through these different layers of things that we have to consider so that we can see where mental illness sits amongst these other things that are also important. I'm probably not the best person to talk about the incidence of mental illness in Bermuda, firstly because I haven't been here for a long time, and secondly because I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist. I can certainly talk about child and adolescent psychiatric conditions and the differences. So it's very clear to me that I was going to say the incidence of ADHD, let's say the diagnosis of ADHD is much higher here than in other parts of the world. And the reason I'm not saying the incidence is because I'm not sure all those cases are ADHD. Amongst children and young people, the incidence of schizophrenia, which is a mental illness that keeps me awake at night, not because I suffer from it, but because I worry about it. Gratefully, it only affects a few children, but sadly, it ravages their lives. And, we know the 5 or 6 children on this island that have that illness, and it's very, very destructive. As far as other conditions seen amongst the children and adolescent population, there's probably less conduct disorder in Bermuda than in Europe and in the States. I think drug and alcohol abuse is probably less in the adolescent and population here than in other parts of the world. It may be better for someone who works in adult services to talk about the incidence of schizophrenia and mental illness in that arena.
Well, speaking from somebody who suffers from multiple mental illnesses, let me just give you a little bit of background perhaps on the conditions that I do have. At the age of 5, I started exhibiting symptoms of Tourette syndrome, which were then quickly followed by what are considered some pretty common comorbid conditions of anxiety, depression, OCD, hypochondria, at times agoraphobia. And having grown up with those conditions, and watching how they've developed and what they've done to me over time has been a very interesting thing. I think in Bermuda, as I've reached out and been very public about my conditions, I've had people come to me privately and discuss with me what they have. I see a lot of people come to me and discuss anxiety issues. A lot of people come to me and have depression issues, obsessive compulsive behavior, and some eating disorders. And they come mostly to me because I think they feel safe coming to me because I am so public about my condition. And they frequently will ask me where they can go and what they can do and how they can begin getting help. So those are the conditions that I see primarily amongst the people that I speak with. And they're pretty much looking for a safe way to get into a treatment plan.
Good evening. My name is Winston Rogers, and I'm a clinical manager at Mid-Atlantic Wellness Institute, and I have worked at the psychiatric facility from the time that it was St. Brendan's Hospital. I started there in 1976, so I have spent a considerable amount of time at Mid-Atlantic Wellness Institute. One of the things that I've always found as a major problem when it comes to mental illness in Bermuda is that statistics haven't been readily available to say what number of depressive cases or what number of cases of persons suffering with schizophrenia. There was never anywhere that one could go, at least when I was trying to do any research, to be able to give people correct numbers. We never had the figures to be able to say that there's so many people, so many cases with schizophrenia, so many with depression, those type of things. But if you want to look at worldwide statistics, and you would say that Bermuda is no different to anywhere else in the world, then 1 in 4, 1 in 6 persons suffer with some form of mental illness, some form. And mental illness, there could be as many mental illnesses, which is conditions of the mind, as there are physical illnesses. And if you could think of physical illness from anything as small as an ingrown toenail, if it's affecting your physical self, then it's a physical illness. So if you look at mental illnesses, the mild anxieties right on up to the major mental illnesses such as schizophrenia and depression, those things exist in Bermuda. The incidences of them, I cannot fully give you that.
Good evening, Tanae Furbert with the National Accessibility Advisory Council. I was just telling Mr. Rogers that I did happen to record the Bermuda census of 2010, and it does not give a breakdown of specific diagnosis, but what they did capture was mental and emotional disorders. And the 2010 census stated that there were 585 persons with mental illnesses. Now remember, it's a sampling that they do, and that there was more females than there were males. As far as autism, because they did specifically capture autism, there was 54, and Alzheimer's were 200. As far as conditions that they termed disabling, they looked at a total of 208, in which the community thought their condition was disabling. Again, female at 108 were more than males, and autism was 38, and Alzheimer's 145.
Can I just pick up on that point? Because we can work out, just to reflect on that. So the autism figure for children is 58 in 2010. I think, and this is for another discussion on another day, about the incidence of autism, but I think it's fairly well accepted now that 1% of the population have difficulties on the autistic spectrum. So if we just took the school age going to children in Bermuda, which there are 13,500, 1% is 135. So that's to give us a figure. So it feels like they're capturing about a third in the census of what may really be out there. But of course, that's the whole spectrum. So some of those will be very high functioning, and people could possibly not be aware of it, right down to very severely affected, where children have no speech and very little interaction with the environment, as well as the other difficulties that autism brings. So just to give you an idea of the figures and how they probably need to be tripled to give you an idea of the true incidence. 54.